Hi everyone, this is Jim from Nirmata. In this quick video, I'm going to show you Nirmata's integration with Kubernetes. What Nirmata does for Kubernetes is three things. First off, Nirmata provides simplified application delivery and management on Kubernetes clusters. Second, Nirmata can automate the deployment and operations of Kubernetes clusters on any public or private cloud. And lastly, Nirmata can also provide elastic management of container hosts on any public or private cloud. So this could be integrations with AWS and Azure for public clouds, for example, or with private clouds like OpenStack and vSphere. Today, what we're going to focus on is the first aspect, the application delivery and management, which is most important to DevOps teams. So there's 5 things we're going to look at in this video. First off, we'll see how easy it is to model Kubernetes applications in Nirmata without having to do manual editing of YAMLs or other manifest files. Next, we'll look at deploying an application into a Kubernetes cluster. So here we'll deploy an application into an Azure cluster. Then we'll look at how Nirmata can help manage Kubernetes applications once they're deployed and running on an ongoing basis. Next, we'll look at network microsegmentation for security and isolation within a shared cluster itself. And lastly, we'll look at troubleshooting, which is extremely important for DevOps teams as they're managing their application. So let's get started. So here I'm logged into my Nirmata account. Nirmata is a multi-tenant secure SaaS. So here in my account, I see my dashboard and the activity as well as the containers deployed and the hosts in my account. So let's go to the applications view. So here I can see that there's an application catalog, which I can use to quickly import applications, or I can choose to model my own application. For this demo, we're going to use this application, ShopMe K8s, which has about 6 microservices as well as an application gateway and ingress controller in Kubernetes speak, which we're going to use for traffic coming into the application. So if I look at each service, I see immediately that I have several properties configured. For example, whether it's things like environment variables that I can configure. I can configure the images or containers within a pod, as well as the networking information for that service. I can configure health checks and probes. Of course, the container image that I'm going to be using, as well as the tag. And optionally, I can also configure volumes if needed for that service. So this is how it's extremely easy. So if I wanted to add a new service, I would similarly model, let's say we were adding a payment service into our application. I would model this with a few clicks and fill out some basic information, which allows me to add that service into my application blueprint itself. So once I have my application modeled, what this looks like at this point is I have about, as mentioned, about 6 microservices behind a load balancer. And you can also see that I've defined dependencies across some of these services to make sure that I can control the initialization order for my application. So once these the dependencies on the services are deployed, or are defined, I'm ready to now deploy and manage this application. But let's take a quick look at some of the other properties we have over here at the application level. So here you see in the gateway, which acts as an ingress, I see I have different URL routes defined for my application. I also have routes defined to allow the gateway to talk to each service, as well as scaling rules that I can define per service, an affinity rule that I have defined across certain services, which I would like to be co-located on the same host as they are deployed in my cluster. So once all of this is set up, in Nirmata, I can quickly see this or export it as a set of Kubernetes YAMLs. So here, for example, when I'm looking at my service, let me bring that up again. I see I'm exporting it to YAMLs, and it's produced a set of YAMLs for the entire application. So just quickly looking and browsing through some of these files, what I see is there's a namespace for my entire application. And Also, for each service, I see several different YAML files, like a deployment file, which has, the scaling as well as some of the basic constructs required for the pod for that application service, as well as I can see there's for each service a service file which shows how other services can interact with that particular service. So, say for example, if I'm looking at a particular, in this case, catalog, I can go down this list and I can look for my catalog. There's a network policy, there's an ingress for my catalog, and there also is a catalog service. So in this case, this is customer service, but there would be a similar service file created. So all of these I can now export as a zip file, or I can deploy with a single click onto my running Kubernetes cluster. So now that we have our application defined, let's go ahead and deploy this and run some instances of the application. So in Nirmata, a single application can be deployed into multiple logical environments, and each environment is fully segmented, fully isolated in its own namespace in the Kubernetes cluster. So here I'm selecting our app, I'm giving this my environment a name, K8S demo, and we're going to say Kubernetes prod 2 is the cluster we're using, and we've already selected the application. So once I go ahead and click add, what Nirmata is going to do is create a different environment and application instance here. And we'll see in a few seconds that my services, based on the dependencies that we had declared, my services are going to start coming up and go into running state one by one and in the right order. So we see our application, is already up and running. But beyond just deploying the application, there's a lot of different interesting things we can do now to manage the application. So say, for example, I want to rapidly scale up a service, and in this case, we're doing it through, directly through the UI. But this is also possible through Automate, through REST APIs, through alarms, and the some of the other features that we have in Nirmata. But you see, in a few clicks, I'm able to scale up or scale down services. I'm able to, like, if I remove that policy, the scaling policy rule, that service will automatically go back down to the size of one pod instead of running three pods like we had before. Beyond just being able to, look at the instances of the service and scale them, I can also now, if I need to do more troubleshooting, I can easily look at the logs for a particular pod. So here we're looking at, this Tomcat instance. We see some of the Catalina logs, everything that was output by that particular container. I can also connect to the shell for the container. And this, of course, depends on the container type. And if your container can support a shell, it's extremely easy through my cloud console to go and now connect to the shell. Very useful for troubleshooting, diagnostics, and collecting information about running services. Another feature I want to quickly show is if I go back to my environment, and let's say we want to do an update of the versions for all of the services. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select a different tag. In this case, we'll select blue as the tag instead of latest, and we'll select all the services that support this blue tag. And once I click update, immediately there's a workflow that's launched, and we'll see in a few seconds each one of these services will be upgraded from instead of latest, they will be switched to the blue tag. So again, extremely simple to do, either through the UI or through REST APIs based on your CI/CD workflows. So far what we've done is we've modeled an application, we've deployed it into a Kubernetes cluster, and we also took a look at some of the management capabilities that Nirmata provides through an extremely easy to use and powerful web console. So let's in this next section, what I want to do is show a more advanced feature. I mentioned earlier that each environment, when you deploy an application to an environment in Nirmata, it's fully isolated and segmented. But what also happens underneath the covers is based on the routing rules and based on the policies that you set up for your application. Nirmata enables microsegmentation even at a service level. So let's take a look at how this works. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into my gateway, which is an ingress in Kubernetes, and we'll connect to a couple of services. So here we have the deal service, and I'm also going to go to the catalog service in my application. And initially, so from, let's say if I'm in the catalog, let's say I'm in the deal service and I want to reach catalog, if I try and do a query, and what this is doing behind the scenes is it's going to try and locate that service, find out the IP address, and complete a call. As we see over here, and this is going to time out in a few seconds, it's not working, right? So let's go and take a look at our environment and see what we can do about that. So in our environment, we have a few things defined, and this all was inherited from the application blueprint that we created. So we have routes defined at the ingress level for catalog as well as all of the other services. So that's how we were able to connect to these applications. Running each container, each service that's running, we were able to connect to it from the outside. But what we also need to check is if we have the right routing rules defined. So if I go into my routing policy for my environment, what I see is I have a deny all as a default action. And then I see that the gateway is allowed to talk to particular services, but we don't have any allow actions for the other two services we want, in this case, to communicate. So we were going from deals to catalog. So let's go ahead and add a rule for that. So here I am adding an allow rule to go from deals to catalog port 80. So once I do that and click finish, what Nirmata is going to do is it's going to create the right network policy, deploy it to the right cluster. And what we see is now if I go back to catalog, I try to connect to deals. I found one running instance of the deal service and I'm seeing the IP address for it, right? So very simple to do. Interestingly, if I go to catalog and try to connect to deals, in this case, we are saying we haven't, because we only enabled a route in a single direction, this should not be allowed, right? So we should see a timeout here in a few seconds. So yeah, it looks like it's not working, and it should say failed. We'll come back to that. But in the meanwhile, let's also go ahead and do this. I'm going to remove this rule that we added last. So we added this rule from deals to catalog. So let's go ahead and remove that. And we'll go back and just make sure that it also fails. And the previous call that we made just came back with a fail. And if we go back here and see the call that was working, it should also come back and not be able to complete that the communication between these two services. So extremely easy to set up microsegmentation to control exactly which services can connect to which other services. And this is all agnostic of so in this demo, we are using underneath um, the, the service networking through a plugin for Kubernetes, but it's extremely, from an application perspective, all you need to do is be able to control the routes and set that up in your blueprint, and everything's executed underneath the scenes. Nirmata will set up the right network policies, which calls, in this case, a Calico plugin in Kubernetes to do the right kind of segmentation for your environment. Next, let's take a quick look at how Nirmata makes it extremely easy to troubleshoot and debug common problems that are seen with containerized applications, especially at scale. So let's suppose, as you're in your CI/CD pipeline, changes are made. Here, what we're seeing is one of our environments, the shop demo 1, went into a fail state. So what we're going to do is we're going to drill down, and we see that there's one service, like as you saw, it went from executing to failed. So there's some retry going on and an issue with that container coming up. Nirmata has also created an alarm on that service, so this is something that you could get notified for right away. And what we'll see is if we go back into that particular service, what I want to take a look at is try and debug and see why that container is not running, and also try and pinpoint who made the change and what we can do about it. So if I click on that service, I see that there are some container exits that have been recorded, and my service availability in the last few minutes is fairly low. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and click on the troubleshooting panel. I'm going to see what's going on in terms of the of this particular service. So if I look at this over time, I see that the failures had started fairly recently. But what we want to do is we want to go and see, try and look at what exactly is going on with some more recent container exits. So scrolling down here, I see all the exited containers for that service that Nirmata has collected and archived. And in fact, it already tells me that there's a run command that cannot be found. If I click on the logs for that service, it's telling me that there's somebody entered in a command called bad command, which obviously is not a valid command, and that is not gonna make the container run happily, right? So that is most likely the problem. I can also view, of course, if I want with a single click, all of the container information. Now, keep in mind that these containers no longer exist. They, were created and they got deleted already, but Nirmata has archived away the exit information to allow us to troubleshoot and debug. In fact, if I go and also look further in my activity log, I see that it was actually me entering in a command and I made a change and redeployed that service about 8 minutes ago, right before we recorded this, to introduce this particular error. So if I go to my service and let's say, let's take a quick look at how we can fix this. So if I go into my blueprint, I see the service that we changed. And I want to go in here and update the command itself. So we see here that we have bad command, and we know that this particular service, given that it's a Tomcat instance, doesn't really require us to put in a run command. So we'll just go ahead and remove that. We go to our environment, which is failing, and I see Nirmata is telling me now that there is a change available for that particular service. So to pick up that change, all I need to do is redeploy that service, and our SLA should go back the service should go back to running in a few seconds, and we should see that the problem gets fixed. So I just click to redeploy, and once this particular instance gets deleted, we'll see that the new one should be deployed in a few seconds. And at that time, we'll pick up the change that we made to fix the command, and the service should go up and running. So it went into pending health check, which is already looking a little bit better than before. And let's give it, if we drill down into the service, we'll see that it's executing, and there we go, it's running. So we're back up into, our SLA is improving again. We're seeing that the service is running, and we've fixed the problem just by being able to rapidly troubleshoot and figure out exactly what happened, what change introduced the problem, and remediate it in an extremely easy to use manner. So in this demo, we have seen how easy it is with Nirmata to model, deploy, as well as manage Kubernetes applications with Nirmata. However, the demo was fairly brief and we have only covered a small percentage of the features. There's several other features that Nirmata offers, including, like we mentioned, even being able to deploy and operate Kubernetes clusters, as well as manage the container host on which your applications and the Kubernetes environments are running. If you wish to find out more information, please do reach out to us, give us your feedback. You could go to nirmata.com, sign up for an early preview of what we are launching with Kubernetes, and reach out to us on our website for more information. Thank you.